The faint, almost imperceptible chemical tang, sharp and alien amidst the sweet, milky aroma of freshly prepared infant formula, was the first warning. Special Agent Dr. Lena Hansen, on coveted maternity leave from her demanding role as an FBI Infant Protection Liaison, paused the bottle halfway to her newborn son, Leo's eagerly searching mouth. Her finely honed instincts, sharpened by years of investigating the darkest corners of crimes against children, screamed louder than any siren. Leo, nestled in the crook of her arm, began to fuss his tiny fists, clenching his perfect rosebud mouth, working in anticipation of the feed he so clearly needed. But Lena's attention was wholly captured by that subtle wrong note in the formula's scent, a scent she knew as intimately as her own skin after weeks of round-the-clock feedings. She lowered the bottle, her heart suddenly a frantic bird beating against her ribs. Ben, her husband, looked up from the sofa where he'd been attempting to catch a few precious moments of sleep, his brow furrowed with concern at the sudden tension in her posture. "Lena, what is it? Is Leo okay?" Lena didn't answer immediately. Her gaze was fixed on the bottle, then on the nearly full canister of powdered formula on the kitchen counter. With a hand that was surprisingly steady, she placed Leo carefully into Ben's waiting arms. "Take him, Ben. Just keep him calm for a minute." "What's wrong?" Ben's voice was tight with a new parent's ever-present anxiety. "I don't know yet," Lena said, her voice unnaturally calm, a defense mechanism kicking in. "Something's not right with the formula." She moved to the counter, her movements precise, economical. She picked up the canister, her eyes scanning its surface. The seal on this particular brand was an external plastic wrap and an internal foil pull tab. The plastic wrap was gone, as it should be since they'd opened it yesterday, but the foil tab, she tilted it under the kitchen light. Was that a tiny, almost invisible puncture mark near the edge, something that could have been made by a fine needle, or was she imagining it? Her professional paranoia bleeding into her new maternal hypervigilance. The scent. It was stronger directly from the powder, a faint but unmistakable acridity overlaying the bland sweetness. Bleach, or something similar, something designed to cleanse, to sterilize, to eradicate. A wave of nausea, cold and terrifying, washed over her. This couldn't be. Not here, not in her home, not to her child. Her training took over a cold, clear current, cutting through the rising tide of maternal panic. She was no longer just Lena Hansen, new mother. She was Special Agent Hansen, an expert in crimes against infants, an investigator who had seen the unthinkable. She reached for a sterile evidence collection kit she kept in a locked cabinet, a holdover from her field days, a precaution she'd never imagined needing in her own kitchen. With meticulous care, she took a sample of the powder, then a sample of the mixed formula from the bottle Leo had almost drunk. She sealed them, labeled them, her movements. Automatic, ingrained. "Lena, you're scaring me," Ben said. His voice hushed, his eyes wide, as he watched her. Leo, sensing the tension, had begun to wail a thin, piercing cry that usually tore at Lena's heart, but now barely registered through the roaring in her ears. "I need to run a preliminary test," Lena said, her voice clipped. She had a small portable toxicology unit, another piece of specialized equipment from her FBI life, capable of detecting a range of common household and industrial toxins. It was designed for rapid field assessment in abduction or endangerment cases. "Pray I'm wrong, Ben. Pray I'm just an overtired, paranoid new mom." But as she prepared the samples, her mind was already racing, connecting dots, forming a horrifying, almost unbelievable hypothesis. The noise complaints, the increasingly hostile notes left on their door. The way their HOA president, Karen Edwards, had stared at Leo with an expression that was less about annoyance and more about distaste. Karen Edwards, who lived 2 doors down, who had made it abundantly clear that the normal sounds of a newborn infant were an intolerable intrusion into her perfectly ordered, child-free existence. Karen Edwards, who had escalatingly hinted that they should do something to reduce the noise, or perhaps find a more suitable living arrangement for a family with such a disruptive baby. The preliminary test results on her portable unit were horrifyingly, sickeningly positive. Trace but significant levels of sodium hypochlorite, bleach, in her baby's formula. Someone had deliberately, maliciously poisoned Leo's food. Someone had tried to silence her son permanently. The room tilted. For a moment, the meticulous FBI agent vanished, and only the mother remained a primal scream of rage and terror trapped in her throat. She looked at Leo, her tiny, perfect, innocent son, still crying in Ben's arms, utterly unaware of the lethal danger he had just so narrowly escaped. And then the agent returned, colder, harder, more fiercely determined than ever before. This wasn't just a crime. This was an act of war against her child, against her family. And Karen Edwards, she was certain, had just become the subject of a full-spectrum federal investigation for the attempted murder of an infant. Lena's expertise, her entire professional life, had been dedicated to protecting children like Leo from monsters. She had never imagined the monster would be living 2 doors down, disguised as a pillar of their suburban community. The hours that followed the discovery were a blur of controlled fury and chillingly precise action. While Ben, pale and shaken but resolutely strong, focused on comforting Leo and preparing a new untainted bottle of formula from a securely sealed emergency stash, Lena had insisted they keep Lena herself, transformed entirely into Special Agent Hansen. Her first call was not to local police, but to her direct superior at the FBI's National Center for the Analysis of Violent Crime, specifically the Child Abduction and Serial Murder Investigative Resources Center, CASMIRC, where the Infant Protection Liaison program was housed. This was not a simple assault. This was a targeted attack on an infant with a chemical agent, a federal offense with profound implications. Marcus. She said, her voice devoid of emotion, when her unit chief, Marcus Thorne, answered, "It's Lena. I have a Code 1 infant endangerment. My residence, my son." The silence on the other end was brief but loaded. Marcus Thorne was a veteran agent, a man who had seen the worst of humanity, but Lena could almost hear his mind recalibrating, processing the unthinkable one of his own, an expert in protecting infants, now a victim. "Talk to me, Lena. What happened?" Lena laid out the facts, concisely, clinically, the suspicious odor, the positive field test for bleach in Leo's formula, the history of escalating noise complaints and veiled threats from their HOA president, Karen Edwards. "I have the contaminated formula secured as evidence. I need a full forensic workup from Quantico Priority 1, and I need a threat assessment and surveillance package on Edwards effective immediately. She's localized 2 doors down. I suspect she gained access to the house or to the formula delivery." "Consider it done, Lena," Marcus said, his voice now hard as flint. "I'll dispatch a child abduction rapid deployment team to your location. They can handle local LE liaison and evidence transport. We'll get a federal warrant for Edwards' premises, look for bleach delivery, tampering, anything. You and Ben, are you safe? Is Leo harmed?" "Leo is unharmed by a miracle," Lena said, a tremor finally entering her voice. "We caught it before he ingested any. We're safe for now. I've initiated lockdown protocols here, old habits." Her home was already equipped with a discreet but effective security system, a consequence of her line of work, but she would be upgrading it immediately. "Marcus, this woman, she's not just an angry neighbor. The level of premeditation, the willingness to poison an infant, this is something else." "We'll find out exactly what it is, Lena," Marcus assured her. "You're not alone in this. The full resources of the Bureau are at your disposal. You focus on Leo. Let us handle Karen Edwards." But Lena knew she couldn't just step back, not entirely. This was her child, her home, her case, in a way no other had ever been. While the official FBI machine roared to life, mobilizing resources with terrifying efficiency, Lena began her own parallel process, her investigator's mind sifting through every interaction she and Ben had ever had with Karen Edwards, every nuance, every veiled threat, searching for the pattern, the motive, the means. Karen Edwards was a woman in her late 50s, childless, twice divorced, who ruled the Serenity Pines HOA with an iron fist and an almost pathological obsession with order, quiet, and conformity. She had been openly displeased when Lena and Ben, a young professional couple, had moved in 2 years prior, and her displeasure had magnified exponentially with Leo's arrival 3 months ago. The crying Karen had declared in multiple HOA notices and several direct, unpleasant confrontations was a violation of community bylaws regarding excessive noise and detrimental to the peace and property values of Serenity Pines. Lena and Ben had tried to be reasonable, had soundproofed Leo's nursery as much as possible, had even offered to mediate with Karen, but she had been implacable, her resentment festering. Had Karen somehow gotten a key? Had she picked a lock? intercepted a grocery delivery where the formula might have been left on the porch. The possibilities were chilling. Lena and Ben reviewed their security camera footage. Nothing overt, no clear images of Karen breaking in. But there were several instances in the past week where Karen had been seen lingering near their property line, her gaze fixed on their house, with an intensity that now seemed deeply sinister. One clip showed her stooping near their recycling bin, which was kept at the side of the house the morning after a grocery delivery that had included the now contaminated formula. Had she tampered with it then before they brought it inside, or had she found a more direct way in? The card team arrived within hours. Special Agents Miller and Rodriguez colleagues Lena knew and trusted. They handled the local police, who were deferential once the FBI's jurisdiction was established. They meticulously documented Lena's kitchen, collected the tainted formula and the canister for transport to the FBI lab at Quantico, and took detailed statements from Lena and Ben. They also arranged for a specialist to sweep Lena's home for any other potential contaminants or listening devices, a standard precaution when an agent was targeted. The preliminary report from Quantico came back within 24 hours. The bleach concentration in the formula was high enough to cause severe internal burns, organ damage, and potentially death in an infant Leo's size. This was not a casual act of malice. This was a calculated attempt to inflict grievous harm to murder. The official charge Karen Edwards would soon be facing, if the evidence linked her directly, would be attempted murder of a minor, a federal offense carrying a sentence of decades in prison. A federal judge, horrified by the preliminary evidence, issued a no-knock warrant for Karen Edwards' home and a warrant for her arrest. The FBI surveillance team already in place reported that Karen was currently at home, apparently oblivious to the storm gathering around her. Marcus Thorne himself decided to oversee the arrest, a measure of how seriously the Bureau was taking this attack on one of their own and her child. Lena wanted to be there to see Karen Edwards confronted with the enormity of her crime, but Marcus forbade it. "You're a victim and a witness. Lena, not the arresting agent. Stay with your family. We'll handle her." So Lena and Ben waited the tension in their home, a palpable entity, while just 2 doors away, the FBI prepared to apprehend a woman who had tried to poison their son. Leo slept fitfully in his bassinet, his small chest rising and falling, a fragile, precious life that had come terrifyingly close to being extinguished. Lena watched him, her love for him, a fierce, protective inferno, her resolve to see justice done absolute and unyielding. This was more than a case now. This was a mother's vow. The arrest of Karen Edwards was by all accounts undramatic. Confronted by a dozen armed federal agents at her doorstep, the HOA president, who had terrorized her small suburban fiefdom with petty rules and passive-aggressive pronouncements, simply crumpled. There was no resistance, no denial, just a stunned, fish-mouthed silence as she was handcuffed and led to a waiting government vehicle. Her meticulously kept house, a shrine to beige conformity and sterile order, was now the subject of an intense forensic search by FBI evidence response technicians. News of the arrest and the horrifying reason behind it spread through Serenity Pines like a toxic shockwave. Neighbors emerged from their homes, their faces a mixture of disbelief, horror, and a dawning, sickening comprehension. The HOA board convened an emergency meeting from which a statement of profound shock and condemnation was issued, along with an immediate suspension of Karen Edwards from her presidential duties. The carefully cultivated illusion of Serenity Pines as a tranquil, idyllic suburban enclave had been irrevocably shattered. For Lena and Ben, the arrest brought a complicated wave of emotions, a measure of relief, certainly, but also a profound sense of violation and a lingering bone-deep fear. The monster had been caught, but the shadows she had cast remained. They upgraded their home security system to a level usually reserved for witness protection safehouses. Every delivery, every unfamiliar car on their street, every unexpected knock at the door sent a jolt of anxiety through them. Sleep was a scarce commodity punctuated by nightmares and the need to constantly check on Leo to reassure themselves that he was safe, that he was breathing. The FBI's search of Karen Edwards' house yielded damning evidence. Investigators found several large containers of industrial-strength bleach, far more than would be needed for typical household cleaning. They discovered a collection of hypodermic needles and syringes, the kind that could be used to inject a substance into a sealed container. Most chillingly, they found a locked diary, and its contents, once decrypted by FBI analysts, painted a portrait of a deeply disturbed and increasingly unhinged individual. Karen's diary entries going back months were filled with obsessive, venomous diatribes about the incessant, nerve-shredding wailing from Leo. She wrote of her failed attempts to reason with Lena and Ben, her growing frustration that her authority as HOA president was being undermined, and her escalating conviction that drastic measures were needed to restore peace and order to her life and her community. The entries detailed her research into effective silencing methods for infants, her experiments with various household chemicals, and finally, her chillingly calm, step-by-step plan to contaminate Leo's formula. She described how she had observed their grocery delivery routines, how she had surreptitiously gained access to a sealed formula canister left momentarily unattended on their porch. During one such delivery, injected it with bleach using a fine needle, and then carefully resealed it, hoping it would be mistaken for a new, unopened container. It was a confession in her own hand of premeditated, cold-blooded attempted murder. "She's a psychopath, Lena," Marcus Thorne told her grimly after reviewing the diary excerpts. "A classic case of narcissistic personality disorder with malignant sociopathic tendencies." The infant crying wasn't just an annoyance to her, it was a direct challenge to her sense of control, her perception of a perfect, ordered world. And in her twisted mind, eliminating the source of that disruption was a justifiable, even necessary act. The evidence against Karen Edwards was now overwhelming, irrefutable. The U.S. Attorney's Office fast-tracked her indictment on federal charges of attempted murder of a minor, tampering with a consumer product with intent to cause death or serious injury, and several lesser charges. Given the strength of the evidence, particularly the diary and the forensic match of the bleach from her home to the traces in the formula, her high-powered attorney began to understand that his only viable strategy was to explore an insanity defense or negotiate a plea to avoid a trial that would undoubtedly result in a life sentence. But while the legal machinery ground forward, Lena, Ben, and Leo had to navigate the treacherous terrain of their new reality. The community of Serenity Pines, once a place of quiet anonymity, was now sharply divided. Many residents expressed their horror and offered heartfelt support, leaving flowers and cards on their doorstep, organizing meal trains, and volunteering to stand watch outside their house in shifts a protective cordon of concerned neighbors. The newly appointed interim HOA board formally apologized to Lena and Ben, offering to cover any and all expenses related to Leo's medical care, though he had thankfully ingested none of the poison trauma counseling and home security upgrades. They also initiated a review of all HOA bylaws, vowing to remove any ambiguous or discriminatory clauses that Karen Edwards might have previously exploited. However, a small but vocal minority, egged on by online conspiracy theories and a deep-seated distrust of federal authorities, continued to defend Karen Edwards. They claimed she was being framed, that Lena was using her FBI connections to persecute an innocent woman, that the whole thing was an overreaction to a simple neighborhood dispute. Anonymous, hateful messages still appeared on community forums, and occasionally a car would drive slowly past their house, its occupants staring with cold hostility. The poison Karen Edwards had tried to feed Leo had in a way seeped into the community itself, creating an atmosphere of suspicion and unease. Lena found herself drawing on every ounce of her professional training and personal resilience to cope. She meticulously documented every instance of harassment, every veiled threat, forwarding the information to Marcus's team. She became an expert in de-escalation, calmly but firmly confronting neighbors who approached her with accusatory questions, her FBI credentials, and unwavering composure often enough to make them back down. She also threw herself into her primary role, protecting Leo. Their home became a fortress, but within its walls, she and Ben strove to create an oasis of love, warmth, and normalcy for their son. They sang to him, read to him, celebrated every tiny milestone with a fierce, poignant joy. Leo, blissfully unaware of the evil that had brushed so close to him, continued to grow and thrive, his gurgles and happy squeals, a defiant counterpoint to the silence Karen Edwards had so desperately craved. One of the most challenging aspects for Lena was the intrusion into her professional life. News of the case, despite the FBI's attempts to keep it low profile, had inevitably leaked to the media. She was Special Agent Mom, the FBI infant protection expert whose own child had been targeted. While the public narrative was largely sympathetic, The exposure was deeply uncomfortable for Lena, who had always valued her privacy and professional anonymity. She found herself second-guessing her own instincts, wondering if her deep involvement in the case, even as a victim, was somehow compromising her objectivity or her ability to function as an agent. Marcus Thorne was her rock during this period. "You are handling this with more grace and professionalism than anyone could reasonably expect, Lena," he told her. "You are a mother protecting your child, and you are an FBI agent who has become the victim of a heinous crime. Those two things are not mutually exclusive. Don't let anyone, least of all yourself, tell you otherwise. Your insights into Edwards' psychology, your meticulous attention to detail, have been invaluable to this investigation. You haven't compromised anything. You've strengthened the case." As part of the ongoing investigation into Karen Edwards, the FBI began to delve deeper into her past, looking for any prior incidents or patterns of behavior that might shed further light on her motivations. They discovered that her 2 divorces had been acrimonious, with both ex-husbands citing her controlling nature, her irrational rages, and her vindictive tendencies. There were sealed records from a previous state where she had lived detailing a series of harassment complaints filed by former neighbors, including one involving the suspicious death of a neighbor's cat shortly after a dispute over its excessive meowing. No charges had ever been filed in that case due to lack of concrete evidence, but the parallels were chilling. The midpoint twist arrived in the form of a routine background check that flagged something unusual. Karen Edwards had, for a brief period, 15 years prior, worked as a volunteer in the neonatal intensive care unit of a hospital in another state. Her volunteer duties had been abruptly terminated, the records stated, for failure to adhere to hospital protocols and inappropriate interactions with infant patients. There were no specific details of the inappropriate interactions, the hospital records being heavily redacted due to patient privacy laws. But the mere fact that Karen Edwards had sought out and then been removed from a position involving direct access to vulnerable sick infants sent a fresh wave of horror through Lena and the entire investigative team. Was it possible that Leo was not her first target? Had there been other infants, other disruptions she had sought to silence? In the past, the thought was almost too horrific to contemplate. The FBI immediately launched a new parallel investigation, liaising with law enforcement in that previous state, trying to unseal the hospital records, looking for any unsolved cases of infant harm or death that might coincide with Karen Edwards' time as a NICU volunteer. This discovery transformed the case yet again. Karen Edwards was not just a neighborhood menace who had snapped under the perceived stress of a crying baby. She was potentially a serial predator, a woman with a long-standing, deeply pathological obsession with infants and a terrifying willingness to harm them. The need to ensure she was permanently removed from society, that she could never again pose a threat to any child, became even more paramount. The upcoming legal proceedings, whether a trial or a plea negotiation, took on a new gravity. This wasn't just about justice for Leo. It was about potentially uncovering and stopping a pattern of evil that might have remained hidden for years. Lena, the FBI Infant Protection Liaison, found herself at the epicenter of a case that embodied everything she had dedicated her life to fighting, a case that had, in the most terrifying way imaginable, come home. The quiet, tree-lined streets of Serenity Pines had become the unlikely backdrop for a drama of profound darkness, but also, Lena hoped, of ultimate, unyielding justice. The FBI's investigation into Karen Edwards' past, particularly her brief tenure as a NICU volunteer, began to unearth deeply unsettling details. Working with cold case detectives in the state where Karen had previously resided, they managed to get a court order to partially unseal the hospital's internal incident reports from the time of her dismissal. The heavily redacted documents spoke of multiple instances of unauthorized handling of infants, failure to follow prescribed feeding and medication protocols, and most alarmingly, observed behavior causing undue distress to critically ill neonates. While there was no explicit accusation of direct harm in the available records, a pattern of boundary crossing and a disturbing focus on the most vulnerable infants was clear. Investigators also found that during the 6 months Karen volunteered at that NICU, there had been a statistically anomalous spike in unexplained adverse events among the infants in the specific ward where she had access, though no direct link to her actions had ever been conclusively proven at the time. It was circumstantial, but chillingly suggestive. This new information, while not directly admissible in the current case against Karen for the attempted murder of Leo, unless a clear pattern of similar crimes could be established, painted an even more terrifying portrait of the woman who had lived just 2 doors down. It fueled the prosecution's resolve to ensure Karen Edwards never had the opportunity to harm another child. Her defense attorney, facing this escalating mountain of damning evidence, the contaminated formula, the bleach and syringes in her home, her own diary confessing the premeditated attack on Leo, and now this shadowy history with other vulnerable infants, began to aggressively push for a plea bargain. He knew that if even a fraction of her past history became public during a trial, the chances of any leniency or even a successful insanity defense would be non-existent. The community of Serenity Pines, meanwhile, was still grappling with the shockwaves of Karen's crimes. The interim HOA board, led by a genuinely remorseful and proactive group of residents, was working tirelessly to restore transparency and repair the damage, both financial and psychological. They organized community meetings focused on healing and reconciliation, inviting child psychologists and safety experts to speak. They established a neighborhood watch program with a specific focus on protecting young families and vulnerable residents. They also began the process of completely overhauling the HOA's convoluted and often punitive bylaws, vowing to create a community covenant based on inclusivity, respect, and mutual support, rather than arbitrary rules and petty enforcement. Lena and Ben, while still deeply affected by the trauma, found solace in the outpouring of genuine support from many of their neighbors. The fear and isolation began to slowly recede, replaced by a tentative sense of belonging to a community that was actively trying to heal itself. Leo, oblivious to the maelstrom that had surrounded his young life, continued to thrive, his infectious giggles and bright, curious eyes, a constant reminder of what they had fought so fiercely to protect. He was hitting all his developmental milestones, a happy, healthy baby, a living testament to their vigilance and the love that enveloped him. The climax of the legal drama came not in a packed courtroom during a sensational trial, but in the sterile, quiet confines of a federal judge's chambers. Karen Edwards, pale, gaunt, and visibly broken, accepted a plea bargain. In exchange for pleading guilty to 1 count of attempted murder of a minor and 1 count of tampering with a consumer product with intent to cause death, both federal felonies, the U.S. Attorney's office agreed not to pursue additional charges related to her past or any lesser state charges. The judge, after reviewing the evidence and hearing victim impact statements from Lena and Ben, delivered with a raw, powerful emotion that left no one in the room unmoved, sentenced Karen Edwards to the maximum allowable under the plea agreement, 30 years in federal prison, with no possibility of parole for at least 25 years. Given her age, it was effectively a life sentence. The judge also mandated intensive lifelong psychiatric treatment and a permanent injunction preventing her from ever having contact with minors or working in any capacity that would give her access to children or vulnerable adults should she ever be released. As the sentence was read, a wave of profound, exhausted relief washed over Lena. It wasn't triumph, not exactly. There was no joy in witnessing the utter destruction of another human being, even one as malevolent as Karen Edwards. But there was a deep, abiding sense of justice done, of a profound threat, neutralized, of her son's future secured. Ben reached for her hand, his grip tight, his eyes reflecting the same complex mix of sorrow and profound gratitude. The falling action was a slow, deliberate process of healing and rebuilding for the Hansen family and for the community of Serenity Pines. The house 2 doors down from Lena and Ben remained empty for a long time, a silent, somber reminder of the darkness that had resided there. Eventually, it was sold, and a new family, young and vibrant with children whose laughter soon echoed in the yard, moved in, symbolizing a fresh start. Lena, after an extended maternity leave, returned to her work at the FBI, her commitment to protecting infants now imbued with an even deeper, more personal understanding of the stakes. She became a leading voice within the Bureau for enhanced protocols in investigating crimes against nonverbal victims and for greater interagency cooperation in tracking individuals who posed a potential threat to children across state lines. Her experience with Karen Edwards, the near miss with Leo, became a powerful teaching tool in her training sessions for new agents, a stark illustration of how evil could lurk in the most unexpected places, hidden behind the most innocuous suburban facades. Ben, equally transformed by the ordeal, became an active advocate for community safety and mental health awareness, joining the new Serenity Pines HOA board and working to implement programs that fostered connection and support among neighbors. He often said that while Karen Edwards had tried to poison their son, she had inadvertently inoculated their community against apathy and indifference. Leo's first birthday was a joyous, sun-drenched celebration in their backyard, attended by family friends and many of their Serenity Pines neighbors. The air was filled with laughter, the scent of barbecue, and the happy squeals of children playing. As Lena watched Leo, his face smeared with cake, his eyes bright with delight, as he clapped his hands to a birthday song, she felt a sense of peace that had eluded her for many months. The fear was not entirely gone. Perhaps it never would be a faint scar on her maternal heart. But it was overshadowed now by an immense gratitude for her son's health, for her husband's unwavering strength, for the colleagues who had stood by her, and for the community that had, in the face of profound ugliness, chosen the path of healing and solidarity. The journey had been a descent into a nightmare, but they had emerged stronger and more united. The monster had been vanquished, not by a singular act of heroism, but by the relentless pursuit of justice, the unwavering power of a mother's love, and the collective courage of a community choosing light over darkness. Serenity. Pines, once a name that had seemed a bitter irony, was slowly, genuinely beginning to live up to its promise. One shared laugh, one act of kindness, one securely sleeping infant at a time. And Lena Hansen, FBI special agent and mother, knew that this in the end was the most profound victory of all. Gyuan.